One of the things I wanted to ask you about was autism. My son is autistic, and through learning about him, I learned that I must have been or am, and just my childhood's so similar. He's nonverbal still, and he's 5. But I wanted to know clearly your brand or you on the spectrum of autism is definitely high functioning. So, I mean, because you said you were autistic
Thank
in
you.
a screen. Well, obviously. What was your childhood like? Were you nonverbal at any point, or did you just excel and start reading books at like 2? Or
I have never in my life been nonverbal. Um, no, actually, I've never actually been able to focus much on reading either. Hyperfixation has always been my most predominant autistic characteristic, I suppose, like dropping everything to hyperfixate on something. For me, it was public speaking, which I obviously enjoy very much and now get to do for a living. So, you know, that worked out pretty well in my favor. Um, I don't like to talk about the autism stuff too much because, I got it pretty easy, all things told. There are people who have it worse. And I was able to essentially like build a life to perfectly accommodate my idiosyncrasies, idiosyncrasies. I always forget
idiosyncrasies?
how many.
Mhm.
Is it syncrasies? There's one.
Yeah.
Okay, I added one too many
I
syllables.
mean, I'm
Idiosyncrasies.
saying it, so it could be wrong, but
I'll go with that. One fewer syllable is that much easier to pronounce.
Yeah.
But I was able to build a life around that, which was startlingly convenient. For me, I think ADHD was always the stronger force in terms of my neurodivergence. When it comes to like when I was younger or whatever, I mean, I didn't have the best social life when I was young, but it also didn't bother me that much. Um,
mm,
I guess like if you look back throughout history as well, like we have a very strict archetype for what a successful social life is, and it's kind of a dumb and arbitrary one, especially in high school. Like people in high school, they care so much about like you have to have this many friends or go to the parties or whatever. Like, I just like talked 40K with my nerdy ass friends and left it at that. And that was fine. And I was happy with that. And now that I'm older and I have a bit more control over myself, I can pretty much do whatever I want socially. So I feel like I waited it out, which is nice.
Yeah. But yeah, I think a successful social life is if you're happy, right? Who cares what the societal definition
yeah, we're
is?
both introverts, big time.
Yeah, I just think the one thing that I never got over is I really dislike verbal ambiguity. When a person is talking, there's so much like etiquette when it comes to like, okay, well, is that like if you're flirting, for example, like there's so much like nuance to the way people phrase stuff about what they actually mean, and it varies person to person. It's not like you can just learn one standard and then be done with it. Every person has their own weird arbitrary set of rules for interpreting how they speak. And so in my experience, I thought, and I still feel, that it was always best to just throw shame to the wind and just be aggressively upfront with every element of the conversation. Hey, do you mean this? Just to be clear, do you mean this? And if they find that annoying, like, okay, then things wouldn't have worked out anyway. The point's to not be ashamed of it.
Wow. How do you do that? How does that work with relationships?
Always worked for me. If it ever didn't work with a person, I probably wouldn't have been good like partners with them anyway. So um I just dislike the ambiguity. I feel like I'm generally pretty upfront and direct when I speak. I don't leave people guessing as to what it is I mean, especially interpersonally when I'm trying to like get to know a person. But that's a skill, and I'm pretty good at speaking. So maybe some people are just ambiguous because they aren't as practiced with being deliberate with their speech, and that's fine. That's not like an insult to me or whatever. But I think it's acceptable for me in response to one, to get clarifications from them. And if they have a problem with that, then that's on them.
Yeah, so it's interesting to hear you say that because I have a brother on the autism spectrum, and I think my father is as well. And I think I have adapted by speaking very bluntly and directly. I think because often that's not understood if you're speaking, with a more, ambiguous tone. And so I will sometimes get dinged by people, for being so like upfront and direct. I don't stop, I still do it anyway, but yeah, it's because I prefer it. So, but it's interesting to hear you, talk about that.
I think it's generally better to go about it that way anyway. You know, there's enough ambiguity in people's day-to-day lives. I've noticed that even a lot of neurotypical people, you know, people who I don't consider to have any issues generally understanding people, they're constantly fraught with anxiety over, well, what did this person mean? You know, it's like a trope, right? Well, what did she mean with this text? You know, fucking ask. Just ask. Like
Mhm.
if there's an issue with asking, then you probably shouldn't be talking to that person anyway, because they're not adult enough to handle like mature conversation about their intentions. Clearly we all struggle with this, so maybe if we were all a bit more upfront, not only would it make life a little easier for autistic people, I think it would make life easier for everyone.
Yeah. Now you recently started Adderall, correct?
Yeah, like 4 or 5 months ago, which has helped tremendously with ADHD stuff.
Yeah. Do you find that your outward, immediate, just saying whatever you want to say has diminished at all, or does it keep you in check at all? Or
No, I don't think it limits my personality in any way. I
ah,
feel like that was always the I feel like that was the thing I was always worried about with medication of any kind, the idea that it would somehow limit my personality. That hasn't been the case so far. Maybe it is for some medications. I don't want to speak for all of them, but for me, it has not been the case.
that's good. Yeah, it did for me. I take Adderall as well, and I find that in the morning when I first wake up, I have these amazing ideas. I take an Adderall, and they weren't really that interesting, actually. The ideas. It's
Really.
like, yeah, it took a while for it to get there, though.
I find for me it's quite the opposite actually, that I tend to be a little bit more muddled before you know, if I haven't had you know, Adderall or whatever for a while, and I'm able to concentrate a little bit more after I have, and that's generally to my benefit.
Yeah, I'm sure it depends on the person and how your mind is interacting, with the medication. So totally makes sense.
There's a lot of nuance to how those particular medications function with individuals. It's usually best to get follow-up consults, especially because you can have partial successes sometimes, where it seems as though the negative uh, symptoms that are being treated have been addressed, but there are like you know, side effects that could be ameliorated if you took a slightly different medication, something like that.